For those of you who I have not had a chance to meet virtually or in person, my name is India Williams. I'm Community Director for ScaleHealth. So again, another thank you just to all of you for choosing to spend some time with us this afternoon. I hope you've learned something already while you've been here, or if not, you learn something new as we go on through the rest of the day. But for the next 30 minutes or so, I am super excited to be leading a conversation with Joe Schonkweiler from Amazon Web Services. Joe is a physician and entrepreneur, now leading U.S. healthcare and life science startup business development at AWS. Joe began his career as a general surgeon and has also served as a startup CEO and health policy advisor in the U.S. Senate. Cool. Prior to joining AWS, he was VP at Adelaide, a health tech startup that partners with independent primary care doctors to help them transition to value-based care. Joe, super excited to have you on with us today. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, India, and thanks to the ScaleHealth team for having me here and to be part of this. I was able to join for some of the earlier conversations, and I think hopefully this will dovetail nicely into that. And yeah, what a fantastic event! Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure it will. And as we're talking about the topic of COVID silver linings, just to get us started. What's one silver lining that started a kind of global dialogue on the ongoing challenges within the healthcare industry? And then specifically, can you kind of talk to, some of the challenges and trends that you all have been following at AWS?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, as a lot of the guests here in the audience will know, sometimes it's hard to tease out the trends and the challenges because they will in healthcare, because they will, the one trend is they tend to run in parallel. But at AWS and in general, we've been following a lot of the same trends and seeing some of those challenges arise. And I think I'd love to dig into how some of those are becoming silver linings, as we hopefully see the next stage or the end of the pandemic in sight. But number one, certainly data. Healthcare data is notoriously messy. It's incomplete. It's complex. It's hard to deal with. Number two, I would say, costs, the rising costs globally, not just in the US, but all over, but we're particularly sensitive to that in the United States. The lack of innovation on the care delivery side. So there's some, we're trending, more toward that than we have been previously, but we still see a lack of really innovative care delivery models. And then I would say on the positive side, and I'd love to talk about this more throughout the conversation, the rise of value-based care models and them starting to come to their own at a systems level. Peter was referencing that in the last talk about how they'd wish they'd capitalized on some of those things. But I think just by virtue of having somebody mention that on a stage like this is a great step forward for value-based care.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about that kind of first trend that you mentioned around data. Of course, always a big topic in the healthcare industry, but has become even more of a focus now because of the pandemic, and continue to be crucial. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, now that vaccines are being rolled out globally, with data as a major focus, how is the team, yourself and AWS, thinking about enabling healthcare organizations to collect this information and how to analyze the data?
Absolutely. At AWS, the focus is really on digitization and utilization of that healthcare data. So trying to accelerate that process. We see it as collecting that data effectively and efficiently allows you to unlock all the potential that exists out there on the healthcare side. It's a challenge, as I said, because it tends to be messy, and we tried to tackle that with purpose-built services. AWS, we think we have the broadest and deepest cloud service portfolio. When you combine that with security, reliability, data privacy, all the things that we're proud to provide, it really does get to that unlock for the potential that exists within the reams of healthcare data that go through the system all over the world.
Awesome. And as we're talking about data, a big piece of that conversation is what do we do with it once we've collected the information? Right. And so that's also, hugely become a part of the COVID story as well. So what are your kind of recommendations? What should we be doing with this information that's being generated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it definitely hits at something that I think I can have a very practical nature on this from my clinical days and maybe somewhat on the
Absolutely.
policy side. But it's really, what do you do with it? Like, it's great to have all that information at your disposal. At AWS, that really feeds into our machine learning stack that we're very proud of, particularly on the healthcare side. We've had some announcements around this recently. We have purpose-built services for medical data that get at structuring the data and being able to actually use it. So we have Comprehend Medical, which is a way to use natural language processing to turn medical text into data that's usable and structured. We have Transcribe Medical, which is a speech to text for medical speech to interpret it and structure it again. And then back to your key point, which I think is right on, about using it. Like, how do you get actionable insights off of that? And that's where one of our latest releases, general releases now with Amazon Health Lake, which went from preview to general release, I think in the last week or so. And that's really a way to normalize, to index, to standardize healthcare data all in one place. So bringing all these sources together in a single format, the FHIR standard, which is a growing standard for the healthcare data. And when you do that, it makes it actionable. So it allows you to see those connections, to do true population health. All that process happens with all those machine learning services that I mentioned before. And like, just to keep it super practical, as a clinician, but also when I was on the startup side, that's really where the value comes in for the data, because you can see that 360-degree full view of the patient when you incorporate labs and claims and doctor's notes and all these things that have been historically, unstructured in their nature, but allows you to tease out those relationships and really make have a holistic view of the patient through a data set like that.
Absolutely. I can only imagine that aggregation piece is just such a huge, component of that as well. Shifting gears a little bit, we talked about data. I want to talk about one of the other trends that you referenced around value-based care. I know we've got some incredibly smart folks on today's call, but let's kind of expand on that a little bit. It's a phrase that people talk a lot about, but cannot be, it may not be as straightforward for everyone. So if you want to kind of share a few thoughts on that point as well.
Yeah, so value-based care, this has come up a lot because I used to work at Aledade, which is a health tech company that supports independent primary care docs transitioning to value-based contracts or value-based care models, whether that's working on Medicare Advantage or accountable care organizations or ACOs, a program through the Affordable Care Act. I've constantly struggled with the best way to do that. And two quotes I come to mind when I think about the best way to describe and explain value-based care. The first one is sort of a stage setter. So it's from a really fantastic health tech journalist that just made the jump over as an investor, named Chrissy Farr. And she sent out a tweet. Of course, Twitter is now like, the authoritative source for all knowledge, but she sent out a tweet that said something like, the most disruptive thing we can do in healthcare is explain how it works in plain English. And, value-based care is a great example of one of those things that gets thrown around a lot, but it's incumbent upon us in the field to explain it in a way that's approachable. The next quote, because we're talking about value in this sense, is from, I think the world's greatest value investor, Warren Buffett. And so when people ask Warren Buffett what the difference between price and value is, and thinking about stocks and businesses in this context, but I think it holds up for healthcare too. Warren Buffett said, price is what you pay, value is what you get. And so that's how I think of value-based care, that it's basically an equation where value equals outcomes over cost. And that has a lot of really important implications, because that doesn't necessarily mean that something that's high cost is low value, because your outcomes can also drive that value equation. But at its essence, it's really about having a provider community that's focused on results, and they're measuring outcomes while including that cost as part of the equation. And cost, just to like take one like divergence here, is crucial to understanding that. So taking that 30,000 foot view up again, costs, everyone talks again about how costs are growing exponentially in healthcare globally. Deloitte did a study a couple years ago that measured global growth in healthcare costs at about 5% from 2017 to 2022. And that takes you from like almost $8 trillion, excuse me, with a T, to over $10 trillion. And these are just astronomical sums of money. And the whole concept of bringing value and cost together and looking at outcomes allows you to responsibly tackle that cost element. To do that, you really need a whole system working together. The previous panel, they talked about folks rowing in the same direction and everybody being on the same page. And on the theme of, silver linings out of this, it sort of built some of that ethos across the ecosystem, particularly on the provider side, where we see, taking a look at what we can do that's high value, because we have to. We don't really have another choice of a way to reduce those costs. So it's, it really is focusing on outcomes. It's being conscious of what the cost is relative to those outcomes. And that will necessarily shift you toward things like preventative care, doing more robust data analysis and risk stratification, because you have to get ahead of the problems before they become these really high cost, poor outcome issues for patients and the system. And finally, just shifting from this constantly reactive mode where everybody's going episode by episode to that system geared toward well care, geared toward prevention, getting ahead of those things. And I said it was finally, I have one more thing. This is like I spent a lot of time in this world, so apologies.
Go for it.
I think the moment we're in now, we have the potential to have this convergence where the regulators are also seeing, particularly in the US, that they need incentives and systems in place to incentivize that outcome-driven, responsible, cost consciousness in the healthcare side. So that's my final value-based care point.
Love it. I especially love the usage of the quotes or tweet, to kind of help, simplify such a complicated topic. You talked about it a little bit. You started referencing COVID, but I want to kind of connect the dots there a little bit more directly. What do you see as the role of COVID in impacting the shift towards value-based care?
Yeah, I think we're really at one of those moments. See, I said I wasn't going to say anymore, and now you like brought me back into it. But we're really at one of those moments where you can see some of these forces coming together over the last year. And again, like directly related to a lot of the things that we were discussing in the previous panel, where we know from the data coming out of 2020 that it was a particularly hard year financially in the provider segment of the healthcare universe, driven by a huge decrease in elective procedures, as much as 75% globally, but also decrease in preventative care and things like that. So you're canceling a lot of those well visits that you were seeing on the provider side, down by about a third globally by some measures. And that led to a loss of about $200 billion in Q2 2020 alone on the provider segment. So these are already thin margin spaces for providers, hospitals, health systems, and they were just decimated by that reduction in revenue. So that prompted this major shift that people are talking about, the shift toward virtual care. So that's up now 4 or 5 times over what it was year on year. And that sort of opens the door for this discussion about building solutions versus buying solutions for virtual care. And the desire to reduce your costs. So something that drives your top line revenue, which is particularly hard to do at this moment for hospitals, then you have to reduce the cost to maintain financial viability. So you have that side, that playing out on the provider side. On the other side of the ledger are the payers, the insurers. So that money that providers were not generating, that was money saved for the payers. And so they actually did pretty well. They all had, record profits in 2020. And, you could argue whether that's a good thing or a bad, but I think what we're seeing there is that trend toward the payers being pure benefits management, financial institutions. We're seeing them start to shift a bit, taking on things like care delivery, pop health, because they have cash on hand. It provides some flexibility on the payer side. So you have now this shift where you're trending towards some virtual care models, which some of that will stay around, not all of it. Some of it will stay to try to retain your patients and get back to a financial viable state for the providers. And you have the payers willing to entertain some of these flexible models, bringing in new data streams, bringing in new tech, to again get into the predictive modeling side, bring in AI ML capabilities. And the confluence of those two is this synergy, let's say, that really supports value-based models. Because again, back to that equation I said before, value equals outcomes over cost. So the provider side's trying to reduce costs, everybody's trying to increase outcomes, so everybody's moving in the same way. And I think, having seen it from the startup side and now seeing it from the tech and infrastructure side, that we're at this moment where we can really transition the system toward more of those value-based models.
Fantastic. Joe, and here at ScaleHealth, we're all about kind of supporting founders who are working on innovation that's geared towards helping providers and patients across the care continuum. And I hear you talking about this already, but I just want to see if there's any other words that you have in regards to innovation in the actual delivery of care and how that's shifted and where that's heading, as we're, going through another wave of COVID, but as a result of COVID, kind of what is that looking like?
Yeah, in the care, I said at the beginning, and maybe it's unfair to some of these care delivery models that it's been slow to innovate, but I still think it's, at Amazon we often talk about day one, having a day one mentality, and I think it really is day one for a lot of those, and that means just being open, really head down, doing the work kind of thing, and not resting on your laurels for us at Amazon. And the trends on the care delivery side, I think, are positive. So first, that digital first care delivery models, even if the levels snap back to what they were, closer to what they were, I don't think it'll ever go all the way to what they were pre-pandemic outbreak. And I think what you're going to see is a combination. You're going to see apps working in concert with telehealth, working in concert with in-person visits. And, my read in the provider segment, I know we have a lot of experts virtually in the room here, is that the providers are going to be eager to retain that because they want to keep their patients close, to drive those outcomes, to maintain the costs, all the things that we've been talking about thus far on the value-based side. So digital first care delivery models and a tech stack to support that in those new models. The second one, and this is one of my favorite trends, expanding the level of acuity and activities that can happen in the home. I think that's a really untapped space that people are starting to listen to, pay attention to. And historically, that's been home care, which is great and something we need and valuable to folks. And everybody's been, this scenic backdrop you see behind me is where I've lived for 14 months, it feels like. So I definitely know the value of having something that can come to your home and help you in that way. But also the regulatory window for things like hospital at home models that allow you to do higher acuity care in the home. And again, back to that tech stack and these digital first care models that are going to help support that. I'm really excited. And I think there's going to be some amazing startups in that space to capitalize on that. The third big trend that I've seen is remote patient monitoring. So we've seen that transition from the wearables, from like a pure consumer play, into the wearables that can support clinical grade data that feeds into the other models that I talked about. So it gets you into that digital first care. It gets you into higher acuity care with continuous monitoring at home, wearables, virtual visits, mobile apps, all of the above. And I think they're really bright. And I think we are going to see some shifts in care delivery innovation in the near term. The one thing that underlies that is back to my original point, and something that we feel very strongly about at AWS and Amazon, that the data that's going to be generated by that, when you think about these continuous streams of data from remote patient monitoring or other wearables or mobile apps, you have to manage that data appropriately, and you got to use it. Like, to our previous discussion, it's not worth having it if you can't act upon it and get actionable insights from it. So I think, all that combined, plus this trend now toward hospitals and the various provider systems speaking to each other with interoperability, has the real potential to make me eat my words on the care delivery innovation side, I would say.
Awesome. 3 incredibly great points, Joe. And I want to shift gears a little bit, talk about what you're working on over at AWS and the resources that you all can provide to, help move health innovation forward. I know Amazon is famous for its customer obsession. I love that term. I'd love to talk a little bit more about what that means. And I think it would be great in tandem to kind of hear about a few customer stories or use cases that you're able to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So customer obsession is, it's a very real thing at Amazon and AWS, and it's really important to what we do. Like, it comes up, all the time behind the scenes for making decisions as like a, if you're between one thing or another, like, what's the more customer obsessed way to approach that, which is really gratifying to see firsthand as part of the company. But in that vein, like, we're very proud of the customers that we have that are building on AWS, and really, like, been a real part of this story, a silver lining, in a lot of ways, to keep with the theme here. First and foremost, they're not a startup anymore, but Moderna, the mRNA therapeutic and vaccine manufacturer, fully cloud native, built on AWS from the beginning. And having come from, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough that, that I appreciate not having to use pipettes when you want to, generate an mRNA sequence and figure out what proteins come out of that. Like, they were able to do that with years and years of databases, such that they can say, this is what we're looking for in terms of a sequence. We can match that up with the mRNA sequence, that we can match that up with the protein that we want, use their own web-based portal, the design lab, and then with the press of a button, that goes to the manufacturing side. And their manufacturing side is all automated by AWS. There's no paper here. They're collecting their data and they're running their clinical trial data on AWS. So it's really been just a fantastic success story, for a company doing something innovative and becoming a real global phenomenon. And we're very proud of AWS to have been, a small part of them doing that. Another one is, I know a company that's been featured here at this event and is very near and dear to my heart, a company called Olive, which is, I don't want to pick favorites among any of my customers, but I feel very proud of the Olive team, not the least of which because their global headquarters is in Columbus, Ohio, which is my hometown. So they're all over the world, but they are, it's a great Ohio story. They're also an excellent AWS customer, and their mission to create the internet of healthcare is just so compelling from a clinical perspective, from a technical perspective. And, the idea that you can automate these high volume administrative tasks and then connect the intelligence that's created from that to really connect all these disparate systems is so compelling to me, and they do it so well. I know you've had a great Olive presence at this event today, so I'm happy to continue to tell that story regarding the Olive team. They're built on AWS, and they are an excellent customer, and I think they're going to be part of the story of this shifting dynamics within healthcare. And then I could go on all day about customers, but you talked about the vaccines before and the data that's created from that we're generating from vaccine delivery. So in addition to actually making the vaccines at a place like Moderna, there's a company that I've gotten to know well over the last year called Luma Health, which has been powering. It's a patient engagement platform built on AWS. And they swung into action to partner with health systems and local governments, counties, to power mass vaccination. And the buzzword, or the word for Luma and the way they've been able to leverage AWS is really scale. So they're a patient engagement platform. They make it easy simple to schedule your vaccination. And in Cook County, where Chicago is located, they drove the entire city's mass vaccination process. And at their peak, and I may be off slightly on the numbers here, but they were doing 500,000 transactions a minute. And they could have 500,000 people on their platform at the same time. And that was this major growth pattern, and really having an impact on people, getting people vaccines when they needed them. So it's really a great story about how cloud can play into all of these things. And then the last thing is, and something I haven't really talked about much here, but I think interoperability, this is one of those, I'm hesitant to say buzzword because I think it diminishes it, but it's one of these things that we watch very closely, but there are a few ways to actually do it. And this is how, the disparate record systems at hospitals all speak to each other. And a company called Redox is, that's their whole mission in the world, is to generate that interoperability. They're an excellent AWS customer. They are, connecting, hospital data to make it usable by apps and developers. And, as I said, I could go on and on, but those are 4 great ones that are definitely important in the discussion about COVID and how cloud and AWS has been able to support that.
Absolutely, Joe. You actually referenced quite a few names that are familiar to me in our community. And so it's just really exciting to see all of the synergies between what all of us are working on. Talking about, just kind of referencing some of the stories you shared, which were incredible. It seems like Amazon has a really strong culture. And so I'd love to just give you a moment to talk a little bit about that. And if there's anything specifically that startups in the room or the rest of the audience should know just about, how you guys work and how that's implemented.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, culture is really important, that whole saying that, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, like it's a really important, it's an important element. And a lot of that begins and ends at Amazon with the 16 leadership principles we recently added to, I believe. And they're publicly available. You can find them online. And I have it in my home office. I'm hanging on the wall, and they're sort of everywhere. But it really is it's like an operating model, for the company. And I would encourage, as a former startup CEO, I wish I was more in tuned to what's embedded in those principles when I was running a company, even a small company. Ranging from having a bias for action to customer obsession to disagree and commit. When you find yourself at loggerheads with your colleagues, really, really powerful stuff. So I'd encourage everybody to go to the leadership principles. And then 2 things that I wanted to highlight that I've been really taken in by at Amazon and AWS are other sort of operating models that we have. So a big one is this concept of working backwards. This is the idea that you would start with the customer, the solution in mind, and then work backwards to how you get there. So starting with the end in mind. And famously, and in Amazon lore, this is how we got things like the Kindle and the Alexa and one-click checkout on Amazon.com. But it really, it pervades all the decision making that we have. It's probably the most common thing that I've used in my time at Amazon to say, okay, where do we want to get to? Now let's work backwards from that to figure out how we get there. And it's a really powerful concept that I think, businesses, startups, anybody can really utilize. What can't you work backwards from in terms of ideal outcomes? And the last one is, and this was a very AWS centric concept, the idea of removing undifferentiated heavy lifting wherever you can. So, the founding story at AWS, that we were, trying to find ways to allow companies to focus on their value proposition and not worry about those core IT infrastructure elements that you shouldn't have to hire a team just to do that. You should be able, that's heavy lifting and it's undifferentiated, right? So someone else should be able to do that. So that's sort of a real ethos here at AWS. But like working backwards, I think it fits in a lot of contexts. It comes up a lot when I talk to my former startup colleagues to say, which element of this customer facing effort that we're doing for our product is undifferentiated heavy lifting for them? What can we take off of them and take on ourselves? And I think those, that wrapped in this, the customer obsession that you referenced before is, that's it. I mean, that's how you get to grow a business like Amazon, but really any business can do the same thing with that kind of focus.
Awesome. And then last kind of final question, I know probably a lot of the folks online want to hear the answer to this one. Why should startups be using AWS, and what are some of the more specific resources that they can take advantage of?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's sort of my reason for being these days, like trying to get healthcare and life science startups set up on AWS. It's a great question because people think rightfully of Amazon Web Services as a tech first company, that you're providing that, like taking that differentiated heavy lifting off the hands of our customers and allowing them to scale and focus on their core value proposition on the marketplace. And that's true. That's completely true. But on the startup side, because startups are so important to us at Amazon Web Services, we also do everything we can to support startup growth. And what does that look like? It looks like, programmatic, approaches to helping folks build without the fear that they're just like burning money if they make mistakes, through our, things like our Activate program, which provides credits for venture-backed startups. Once you're in the AWS universe, it's things like we have a connections program that identifies enterprise level use cases with some of the biggest companies in the world. And they come to us and say, hey, we have this problem that we're trying to solve, and we think that there's an innovative solution out there that we're not seeing. And you as AWS has this great, have such a great view to the world. It's allowed us to actually put startups into these qualified relationships with enterprises. So, that plus co-marketing, co-selling opportunities, anything and everything we can do to make businesses successful, startup businesses, but all businesses certainly, but particularly startups in my world, successful on AWS and grow is that's the name of the game for us.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, it's been so great chatting with you, and thank you so much for sharing your insights on what Amazon and AWS are doing, first and foremost in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also ways that founders are able to, connect with you all. And it's been fantastic, partnering with you, in terms of the ScaleHealth community. I know many of our founders are utilizing the credits and the resources that you can provide. Before we go ahead and close it out, I just want to give you a moment to say any kind of final last words.
Yeah, thank you, India. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this. I feel so strongly about the role of entrepreneurship and innovation across the healthcare spectrum, and doing that in a responsible way, in a way that is, in keeping with the values that we all hold very dear for providers, for patients, for hospitals, for payers, for everybody in that ecosystem. So events like this, focusing on, what can come out of what's been a really tough couple years for the global community are so important. So thanks for having this event. Thanks for having us. And I look forward to following along with all the success that comes out of this.